It began with something most people never notice. A trash can, half full, sitting beside a polished marble wall on the 42nd floor of Brantcorp headquarters. But what was inside it would topple 30 years of silence. The building was still asleep when it happened. A soft blue dawn pressed against the glass, casting long shadows across empty desks and abandoned coffee cups. Automatic lights flickered on in slow succession, illuminating an empire one bulb at a time. And then came the echo, steady, rhythmic, the sound of a janitor's cart rolling across cold tile. Luis Calderon moved the way men do when no one is watching them. Quietly, without urgency, with the weight of decades resting on his shoulders. He wore his uniform like it was armor, the navy fabric faded from years of washing. To most people in the building, he wasn't Luis. He was simply the janitor, a shape, a shadow, a necessary function in the background of their success. But that morning, fate stopped walking past him. He reached into the trash bin beside conference room A6, intending to lift out the liner in one smooth motion. Instead, he heard it, a distinct, muffled clink, like metal against wood, too heavy for a pen, too sharp for a button. He paused, frowned, lifted the bag higher. A small velvet box tumbled into view. Not the type someone throws away carelessly. Not the type that belongs anywhere near a trash can in a billion-dollar skyscraper. Luis hesitated before picking it up. The fabric was worn but dignified, like something old enough to matter. When he opened it, the hallway seemed to fall silent around him. Inside, resting on a satin cushion, was a ring. Gold. Real gold. Heavy, ornate, and engraved with a symbol almost every employee in that building had seen before. The original crest of Brantcorp, back when it was a fledgling factory run by a visionary nobody fully understood. And beneath the crest, a pair of initials so old the edges of the engraving had softened with time. NB. Nathaniel Brant, the founder, the man who vanished without explanation 3 decades earlier. Luis felt the breath leave his chest. It wasn't fear, more like a sense that he had brushed against something sacred. He looked down the hall, half expecting someone to appear and snatch the ring away. But the corridor remained empty, still, indifferent, as if the building had decided to let him be the first witness. A moment passed, then another. Finally, Luis closed the box, tucked it under his arm, and made a choice that would alter everything that followed. He decided to return it, not hide it, not sell it, not pretend he'd never seen it. Just return it, simply, honestly, quietly. But fate has a strange way of rewarding honesty. As he walked away, a security camera above the hallway pivoted, just slightly, tracking him with a mechanical click that echoed like a warning. In less than 40 minutes, 3 departments would be alerted. Executives would begin making phone calls. Someone would panic. Someone else would get angry because that ring wasn't supposed to resurface. Not now, not ever. And Luis Calderon, the invisible janitor whose name no one bothered to remember, had just stumbled into the center of a corporate secret older than half the people who worked there. Before we go deeper, imagine you were in his shoes. A forgotten object, a legendary name, a decision that could ripple across thousands of lives. What would you do? Keep it? Return it? Walk away? Let me know, because the choice matters more than you think. It's easy to imagine a company's founder as a distant figure, an icon on a brochure, a name engraved on a plaque, a smiling face in an old photo framed behind the reception desk. But the truth is never that clean. Every empire, no matter how polished its public image, begins somewhere humid, cramped, and uncertain. And every founder, no matter how revered, carries ghosts the board will never speak of. Leonard Harrow, Harrow Industries' elusive patriarch, had built the company from a single rented workshop, folding metal by hand until his knuckles bled. Today, the corporation spanned continents. But inside its headquarters, only a few old employees remembered the man who started it all. Fewer still remembered who he had been before the world called him a visionary. The ring that Tomas found on the factory floor wasn't just expensive. It wasn't just sentimental. It was personal. More personal than anyone realized. It had been crafted in 1974, long before the company existed. Before the patents, before the investors, before the glossy corporate awards. It was forged by a local jeweler with gold Leonard had saved for over a year. He had given it not to a shareholder or spouse, but to someone the modern corporation never talked about. Someone who appeared in none of the biographies. Someone erased. To understand why that ring mattered, you have to step back into the world Leonard came from. He was born in a part of the city people now call historic. But back then it was just poor. Red brick terraces lined with laundry, soot drifting from chimney stacks, and children running barefoot through streets their parents hoped they'd one day escape. Leonard had grown up watching men come home from the factories with shoulders collapsed from work that never paid enough. His own father returned every night with oil embedded in the creases of his hands, washing until the water ran black. Leonard promised himself he would not die like that. He would build something of his own. But ambition always has a cost. The ring was tied to the moment that cost began, long before Harrow Industries had its spotless lobby and glass elevators. Long before its workers clocked in under the hum of fluorescent lights. It was tied to the one person who stood at the beginning of Leonard's climb, and the one person who vanished from the story once he reached the top. So when the ring disappeared from the executive archives, a location only a handful of people could access, it should have set off alarms. Yet it didn't. The board didn't know the ring existed. The CEO had only heard vague mentions of a personal heirloom. Most employees wouldn't have recognized it even if they picked it up off the carpet. And that was by design. Leonard had built a legacy, but he'd also buried a past. The only reason the ring resurfaced was because Tomas, a janitor pulling a night shift he hadn't even been scheduled for, saw something glitter beneath a machine. And instead of pocketing it or ignoring it, he turned it in without hesitation. A gesture so small it barely registered to him. Yet so monumental it jolted the founder's old world back to life. Because for the first time in over 30 years, someone had handled the one object Leonard had never meant for anyone new to see. And when Tomas returned it, without knowing what it was or whose it had been made for, it sent a ripple straight into the quiet corners of the corporation that preferred to stay asleep. At that moment, Tomas had no idea where the ring truly came from. But someone else did. Someone who had spent years trying to keep it hidden. And they were watching. Before all of this, before the ring, before the sudden meetings, before the security calls. Tomas had existed in the building the way oxygen did. Necessary, unthanked, unnoticed. Every night at 11 p.m., long after executives locked their glass offices and managers powered down their monitors, Tomas arrived through the service entrance. No ID scanner, no welcome screen, just a metal door, a flickering overhead bulb, and a time clock that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. He hung his backpack in the same dented locker, tied the same frayed apron around his waist, and stepped into the vast corridors of Harrow Industries. To most people, the building was sleek and modern, a monument to innovation. To Tomas, it was a second home, one he cared for, even if the company itself didn't seem to care much about him. It wasn't the work that exhausted him. It was the invisibility. Employees passed him every day without pausing their conversations. Some didn't step aside when he mopped. A few treated him as though he were part of the cleaning equipment, just another object that blended into the background. But every night, Tomas cleaned anyway, carefully, thoroughly, respectfully. In the quiet hours, he learned the building in ways its designers hadn't intended. Which hinges squeaked, which tiles warmed faster, which vents rattled when the temperature dropped. He could navigate the factory floor in total darkness, just by the hum of the machines. His job wasn't glamorous, but it kept his family afloat. His wife's medical bills had nearly drowned them the year before, and now everything Tomas did, every shift, every overtime hour, was done with one intention: keep the household standing, keep her comfortable, keep their son in school. His boss didn't know this. His coworkers didn't know this. No one asked. And that was fine, Tomas told himself. Until the night he found the ring. It was supposed to be an ordinary shift. Waxing the executive hallway floors, emptying bins, wiping fingerprints off office glass. But somewhere between sweeping beneath the old archival machinery and checking for loose screws, something shimmered under the industrial lights. He crouched, thinking it was scrap metal. It wasn't. He held the ring between his fingers, confused. Too heavy to be costume jewelry. Too old to belong to one of the interns. Too valuable to be left lying under a machine that cost more than Tomas would earn in 10 years. Most people would have hesitated. Most people would have slipped it quietly into their pocket. Times were hard. Life didn't always present opportunities. And no one would have noticed. No one even knew the ring existed. But Tomas did what he always did, what no one ever rewarded, praised, or even recognized. He told the truth. He carried the ring to the night supervisor's office, knocked twice, waited, explained he'd found it near the archival equipment. The supervisor barely looked up from his phone as he tossed it into a drawer and muttered, "I'll take care of it." Most janitors would have walked away, but something in Tomas twisted, an instinct, maybe, because the ring didn't belong in a drawer that half the staff rummaged through for spare batteries. So after a moment of hesitation, he added, "It looks important. Maybe it should be reported." The supervisor sighed, annoyed, but logged it into the lost and found system. Not because he cared, but because Tomas wouldn't leave until he did. And that single act, that unnecessary insistence on integrity, triggered the chain of events that followed. Because the next morning, the report reached someone who recognized the description. Someone who hadn't heard that name, the ring's owner, spoken in decades. And suddenly, the entire building shifted. Managers whispered near elevators. HR pulled archive access logs. Security combed badge scans. Something that had been buried deep inside the company's past had been unearthed by accident, by a janitor who didn't even know what he'd touched. Meanwhile, Tomas scrubbed cafeteria floors, unaware of the fuse he had just lit. He didn't notice the way certain supervisors began glancing at him. He didn't understand why someone from corporate had requested his shift history. He had no idea the founder himself would soon know his name. But the walls of Harrow Industries were beginning to move. And Tomas, quiet, unseen Tomas, was suddenly at the center of a story he didn't even know had begun. Some legacies are carved in marble. Others are carved into people, quietly, invisibly, one choice at a time. And as Daniel Chun sat alone in the security office, staring at the old ring he'd just returned, he had no idea he was holding the entire weight of a man's life between his fingers. It started with a single question he couldn't get out of his mind. Why would the founder of a billion-dollar company leave behind something so personal, in a place no one ever goes? The answer, as it turned out, began long before Daniel was ever hired. Before promotions, before expansions, before the company's name became a symbol of innovation. It began with a man named Arthur Hale, a man whose reputation was half legend and half warning. Arthur had built Hale Industries from nothing. No investors, no shortcuts, just grit, an engineering mind that rivaled entire teams, and a stubborn belief that every problem had a solution if you were willing to bleed for it. The employees spoke his name the way people speak of storms. Powerful, unpredictable, unforgettable. But what Daniel had never been told was that the storm had a beginning. Years before the world would know his name, Arthur Hale was simply a boy growing up in the outskirts of Manchester. His family was poor. Poor in the way that meant winters without heat and summers fixing things from the scrap heap because buying new wasn't an option. The ring, that ring, was the only inheritance passed down from his father, a reminder of everything they survived. When Arthur founded the company, he wore the ring every day. Through the first prototypes, the first failures, the long nights, the near collapse, the eventual success. It wasn't jewelry. It was armor. So why did he take it off? Why hide it? Why leave it where no one would ever think to look? Daniel didn't know the founder personally. Most employees didn't. Arthur had retired 10 years before Daniel was hired. But the air in the company still carried his fingerprints. Policies, mottos, rituals, even the phrasing of memos. Everything still echoed his voice. And yet, for someone so immortalized, there were strange shadows around him. In old interviews, Arthur spoke like a man with ghosts, He avoided personal questions. He corrected anyone who called him self-made, insisting that no achievement was truly individual. But the most interesting detail? He hated praise. Employees said Arthur was generous but uncomfortable with gratitude. He once helped a junior worker pay medical bills, but asked that his name never be mentioned. He personally funded scholarships, but refused to attend award ceremonies. It wasn't humility, it was avoidance, as if recognition was painful. And now Daniel understood why. The ring wasn't lost, it was left behind. The more Daniel dug, the more he uncovered pieces of a story that didn't line up. Former employees spoke with reverence, but also caution. Some said Arthur had grown distant in the final years. Others said he often disappeared into that forgotten room, the same room where Daniel found the ring. No cameras, no foot traffic, just a silent space where the founder would sit for hours. What was he doing in there? Daniel asked one longtime engineer. The man's answer was simple. Remembering. Remembering what? No one could say, or maybe no one dared to. Daniel felt the weight of that truth settle in his chest. The founder wasn't just a visionary. He was a man carrying something heavy, something painful enough that he hid the only symbol of his past in a dark, silent room, something he needed to leave behind before stepping away from the empire he built. And that meant the ring wasn't an accident. It was a message meant for someone, just not Daniel. But fate, as it often does, had chosen differently. Because by returning that ring, Daniel hadn't just given back a lost item. He had reopened a chapter of the founder's life that no one was meant to touch. And somewhere in a quiet mansion on the coast, a retired titan of industry, Arthur Hale himself, received a call informing him that a janitor had found his ring. Arthur didn't smile. He didn't thank anyone. He simply whispered 4 words that no one understood. It's starting again, isn't it? A shadow passed through his eyes. And for the first time in 20 years, the founder stood up. Some meetings are scheduled. Others are demanded. But the rarest kind, the ones that change the course of a life, arrive without warning, without preparation, without mercy. For Daniel Chen, it began with a knock. Not on his door, on the security office door. At 6:14 a.m., before the building lights were fully awake, before the first wave of employees clocked in. The air still smelled faintly of fresh floor wax, a scent Daniel had long grown used to. He opened the door expecting a supervisor. What he found instead was a man he recognized instantly, even though he had only ever seen him in framed portraits.
Arthur Hale.
Older now, thinner, his silver hair pulled back tightly, his posture straighter than any man his age had the right to hold. His eyes, icy blue, disturbingly alert, were nothing like the softened corporate biography photos. These eyes belonged to someone who had spent a lifetime building and breaking, building and breaking, building and breaking again. "Mr. Chun?" the founder asked. His voice was low, controlled, and tired in a way that suggested sleep did not grant him peace. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Arthur stepped inside without waiting for permission. The room felt smaller instantly. He looked at the chair where Daniel always sat, the mop closet door, the ring-shaped outline still faintly visible on the desk. His gaze swept across the space like he was mapping it, storing it, searching for something. And then he spoke. "You found something of mine." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I returned it to corporate." "I didn't ask where you returned it." Arthur's tone stayed quiet, but his words cut clean. "I asked if you found it." Silence stretched a little too long. "Yes." Arthur tilted his head. "Describe where." Daniel did. The forgotten maintenance room, the dust, the pipe valve, the small shelf, the faint track in the layer of grime where the ring had rested. Arthur listened without blinking. When Daniel finished, the founder exhaled. A slow, heavy breath that seemed to carry years of memory with it. "I thought that room would stay sealed. It wasn't locked."
"No," Arthur replied softly.
"It never was. That was the problem." He walked to the far corner of the office and rested his hand on the back of a chair, as if gathering himself. Then he turned. Mr. Chan, do you know why men hide things? Daniel shook his head. Fear, Arthur answered. Shame, regret, sometimes guilt. His expression shifted barely, but enough. That room you found, it was my sanctuary, my place to think, my place to forget, my place to leave things behind. He stopped. But the ring was not meant for anyone else's hands. Daniel felt a chill run through him. Sir, I didn't mean to intrude. You didn't. Arthur held up a hand. You did exactly what a good man would do. You saw something valuable. You protected it. And you returned it. The founder stepped closer. You'd be surprised how rare that is. For a moment, the room was still. Then Arthur asked a question Daniel never expected. How long have you worked here? 8 years. On nights? Yes.
No complaints.
No write-ups.
No transfers requested.
Why? Daniel hesitated. I wanted the stability. Stability? Arthur repeated, like the word tasted familiar in his mouth. Another rare thing. The founder circled the small room again. Every movement was measured, every glance deliberate. Finally, he stopped in front of Daniel. I'd like you to come with me. Daniel blinked. Sir, there are things I need to show you, things I cannot explain from a distance. His eyes narrowed. And now that you've touched that ring, you deserve context. Daniel didn't understand. Not fully, but something in Arthur's tone. Something old, heavy, and undeniable. Made him realize this wasn't a request. It was a summons. To where? Daniel asked quietly. Arthur looked toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the elevators. To the place where everything started, he said, and where everything began to fall apart. Pause. And Mr. Chan? Yes. After this, there is no going back. Daniel's heart hammered, but he nodded. And with that, the founder turned, opened the door, and walked into the dimly lit hallway, expecting Daniel to follow. The elevator hummed, low and steady, carrying Daniel and Arthur down 3 floors below the corporate offices. The lights flickered just once, a hesitation in the modern system, and then steadied. The smell shifted, a mix of old wood, faint oil, and something else. Something almost metallic, lingering in the air like a memory. Arthur stopped before a nondescript steel door, its surface unremarkable.
No plaque.
No label, just a number scratched into the metal, 13. He fished a small key from his pocket, worn, brass, and impossible to trace. This is where it's been, Arthur said, hidden in plain sight, for decades. Daniel swallowed hard. He wanted to ask what lay beyond, but the founder's gaze told him to wait, to observe, to feel. The key turned. The door creaked. Light spilled out, faint and yellow, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the narrow beam. Inside, the room was tight, cramped, but lined with shelves. Not ordinary shelves. Metal cabinets, glass cases, and small velvet boxes sat meticulously organized. Each contained pieces of jewelry, old contracts, faded photographs, and fragments of old letters. Daniel's eyes fell on a single open drawer. Inside rested the ring he had returned, polished now, gleaming as if it had never been lost. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were dozens of other rings, each with a story, each meticulously catalogued. Arthur stepped closer. His eyes softened for the first time. You returned it in good faith. But do you know what this ring is? Daniel shook his head. It belonged to my mother, Arthur continued. She built this company from nothing. That ring, it was her symbol of trust, of care, of belief that the right person would always do the right thing. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had done a simple, small act of honesty, yet the gravity of it was staggering. Arthur moved to a wall and pulled down a framed photograph. It was of a young Arthur, standing behind a counter in a tiny shop, a woman beside him handing over a small gold ring. Daniel realized then, the ring he returned had been part of a family legacy, a chain of trust spanning generations. You've proven yourself, Arthur said quietly. And because of that, I have a proposition. Daniel froze. Proposition? He echoed. Yes, Arthur replied, stepping aside to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling deeper into the building. The walls were lined with additional shelves, more artifacts, letters, and more rings. There is a part of this company, a part of our family history, that has never been revealed. Until now. Daniel's pulse quickened. This was no longer about a janitor returning a lost ring. This was about legacy, trust, and responsibility. You will see things you cannot unsee, Arthur warned, and you will be asked to protect them, keep them safe. Honor the line of trust that began with my mother, and now continues through you. Daniel nodded slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down. Arthur smiled faintly, a rare expression of vulnerability. Most people never notice when the smallest things are lost, and the few who do, they are remembered. As Daniel followed him down the spiral staircase, he could feel the air grow colder, the light dimmer, the anticipation building. At the bottom, a heavy wooden door stood waiting, ancient hinges creaking under their own history. Arthur placed his hand on the knob, then looked back at Daniel. Once we enter, there is no going back. Are you ready? Daniel's heart pounded. The room beyond promised answers, and perhaps more questions than he could ever anticipate. He nodded. Arthur turned the knob. The door opened. Inside lay the true secret of the company, the family, and the ring. What Daniel was about to see would change his understanding of trust, legacy, and honesty forever. The door swung open, revealing a room bathed in soft amber light, warm but deliberate, like a carefully staged scene meant to impress, intimidate, and inspire all at once. The air smelled of old paper, polished wood, and a faint trace of lavender, Arthur's mother's signature scent, preserved in the atmosphere like a memory encoded in the walls. Rows of display cases stretched before Daniel, each containing artifacts of the company's past. Ancient ledgers with names of early employees, letters sealed with wax, ceremonial keys, and objects that felt simultaneously mundane and sacred. And there, in the center of the room, atop a polished pedestal, rested the ring once returned. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were dozens of other items. Personal effects, gifts of trust, symbols of faith extended by strangers and employees alike. Arthur stepped forward, voice steady. This is the core of our legacy. Every piece here represents someone who trusted this family, this company, to honor them. And every act of honesty, every gesture of integrity, it is recorded here in one way or another. Daniel's eyes swept the room, taking in the enormity of it all. Each object told a story, some happy, some tragic, but all connected by one invisible thread: trust. Arthur paused, then looked Daniel directly in the eyes. Returning the ring was not just an act of kindness. It was an act of judgment, and it passed. You've shown yourself worthy to know the full story. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing down. What exactly did worthy mean? He followed Arthur to a large cabinet at the back, its surface carved with intricate symbols he didn't recognize. Arthur opened it to reveal dozens of folders, each containing handwritten notes, photographs, and documents detailing decades of the company's operations, and, more importantly, the lives intertwined with it. These are the real stories, Arthur said. The people who believed in us, trusted us, and sometimes doubted us. Some of them succeeded, some failed. But their faith, even in the smallest gestures, allowed this company to survive, even thrive. And now you are part of that history. Daniel reached out, brushing his hand over the folders. The paper was fragile, yet the stories were alive. Each letter, each note carried weight. Some were pleas for help, some expressions of gratitude, some confessions of mistakes. Each was a test of the human spirit and of the legacy his returned ring had upheld. Arthur continued, "The final test is simple in concept, though daunting in execution. You must take this knowledge and act. Protect what is sacred. Honor the faith of those who came before. And when the time comes, extend that trust to someone else, as I have extended it to you." Daniel swallowed. He realized that this room, this hidden archive, was more than a secret. It was a living testament to integrity. Every object here had survived because someone somewhere did the right thing when no one was watching. And now he was part of that continuum. Arthur smiled faintly, almost wistfully. Most people never notice. Most people never understand the power of small gestures. But the few who do change everything. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle in his chest. He wasn't just a janitor. He wasn't just a witness. He was a guardian of trust, a keeper of the legacy, a link in a chain that spanned generations. As he looked around the room one final time, Daniel realized something else. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning. The room had revealed the past, but it had also hinted at the future. Arthur's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "Now you understand. And now, the world will notice your next move." Daniel took a deep breath, the gravity of the moment sinking in. The test wasn't over. The legacy wasn't static. And the choices he would make from this point forward would define not just him, but every life touched by the trust he had honored. For the first time in his life, Daniel understood the full power of one simple act. A single gesture that had returned more than a lost ring. It had returned him to a path he never imagined, a life connected to something greater than himself. The morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long golden beams across the polished floors of the company headquarters. Daniel moved with purpose, no longer invisible, no longer just the janitor who happened to do the right thing. He had become part of a larger story, one that would ripple through the lives of countless people connected to the company. The ring, now safely displayed in the archive, had become more than a symbol. It was a testament to human integrity, to the quiet power of honesty. Employees who had once dismissed him or overlooked him entirely now regarded him with a mix of respect and curiosity. He carried himself differently, aware that every action could influence someone, just as his own small act of returning the ring had shaped the course of history. Arthur had entrusted him with responsibilities beyond the ordinary, tasks that required discernment, patience, and unwavering integrity. Daniel's days were now filled with reviewing correspondence, overseeing community outreach projects, and mentoring younger employees. Each decision was guided by a principle that had been reinforced the moment he had returned that lost ring. Doing the right thing, even when no one is watching, always matters. Outside the company, the story of the janitor who returned a lost ring spread quietly at first, then steadily, reaching local newspapers and eventually national media. Headlines told of a man who had unknowingly safeguarded a fortune, preserving not wealth, but the moral backbone of a family enterprise. Interviews revealed the humility with which Daniel approached his newfound influence, a stark contrast to the sensationalized tales that often accompany extraordinary acts. Communities connected to the company began to see tangible benefits. Charitable initiatives, scholarship programs, and local development projects all bore his mark. Not because he sought recognition, but because he understood the weight of trust. Every gesture, every decision, reinforced the lesson that simple acts of honesty could create monumental change. Yet the impact was not only external. Daniel felt a profound transformation within himself. The invisible barriers of self-doubt, built over years of feeling overlooked and undervalued, had crumbled. He was no longer defined by a job title or by the scarcity of opportunity. He was defined by the power of integrity. Every time he walked past the pedestal holding the returned ring, he remembered the ripple effect of one action. Arthur watched him from across the room, a faint smile on his lips. "You've understood the lesson," he said. "Not just for the company, not just for the people here, but for yourself. That's the legacy. That's why it mattered." Daniel nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of a journey that had begun with a simple act of kindness and honesty. He had stepped into a role he never anticipated, but one he now embraced fully. The past had been honored, the present reshaped, and the future, well, the future was now in his hands. And so, the janitor who had simply returned a ring became more than a figure in a forgotten office. He became a living testament to the enduring power of integrity, proof that the smallest gestures, when guided by principle, could echo through time, reshaping lives, communities, and even the course of history. In the quiet moments after the bustle of the day, Daniel often found himself standing in the empty corridors of the company, looking at the ring now encased in glass. To anyone else, it was a simple artifact, a piece of jewelry lost and found. But to him, it was a symbol, a reminder that choices matter, even when they seem small, even when they seem invisible. It began with a simple question: do the right thing even when no one is watching. That question had guided him through years of anonymity, through countless moments where dishonesty or convenience could have offered easier paths. And yet, it was in answering that question that his life, and the lives of those around him, had changed in ways he never could have predicted. The story of the janitor who returned the lost ring is not just about a single act of honesty. It's about the quiet influence one person can have on the world. One action, guided by integrity, can ripple outward, shaping decisions, inspiring trust, and fostering an environment where ethics are not optional but essential. Employees who once overlooked him began to emulate his diligence, his careful attention to detail, and his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Students and interns who heard the story saw that respect and recognition are not always tied to titles or status. They come from actions and character. Communities connected to the company benefited from initiatives Daniel helped guide, all rooted in the principle that honesty and decency are powerful currencies in themselves. And for Daniel, the greatest lesson was personal. He had discovered that the simplest acts, returning a lost ring, acknowledging someone's humanity, choosing integrity over convenience, could transform one's own life as profoundly as it transformed the lives of others. In the end, it is a story about trust, humility, and the unexpected ways the universe rewards those who act with conscience. The janitor didn't set out to become a hero. He simply returned what was lost, and in doing so, he restored something far greater than a piece of jewelry. This is a reminder to all of us. Greatness is often found in ordinary moments. Influence is built not in grand gestures, but in the quiet, consistent choices we make each day. And sometimes, the simplest act of honesty can echo far beyond what we can ever imagine, shaping lives, communities, and the legacy we leave behind.
This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.